Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Holosun HM3x. This is, of course, their 3x magnifier. But before we get into the video, if you don't know, Gun Deals is a website that provides you with links to some of the best deals in the industry. So whatever it is that you're looking for can probably be found on their website for the best possible price. Now, they don't buy or sell anything. They don't take your money. They only point you in the right direction. So once again, go ahead and check them out. That is gun.deals. And on top of that, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, as all that sort of stuff is free and does help us out quite a bit. Also, comment literally anything down below. Now, full disclosure on the Holosun HM3x is that we have no relationship or affiliation with Holosun for this review. I actually personally purchased this optic quite some time ago. I have a review of this optic on my personal channel, and there is, again, no affiliation or relationship with Holosun for this review whatsoever. And we paid full retail price for this, which I believe at the time I paid $199 for it, and that's kind of still where it's at. Around $199 to like $220 is where you can usually find it, and if it goes on sale, maybe 180 bucks. Now, getting into specifics on the Holosun HM3x, we of course have an aluminum bodied 3x magnifier. I believe the aluminum is 6061 T6. We have a rear diopter on the end for adjusting the reticle to your eyes or just making the image look as natural as possible. And we also have windage and elevation for centering whatever reticle you're using in the glass. It doesn't really affect the actual point of zero. It might introduce a little bit of parallax, but usually that is just for centering the reticle within the window. The body itself is 3.5 inches long and about 2.5 inches tall, depending on the riser mount. Getting into the mount itself on the Holosun HM3x, they actually did a really good job with the base mount itself. So as you can see on there, it has two squared off recoil lugs that work to enhance its locking capability to the upper receiver by creating additional contact surface. Also, those butt up against the Picatinny on the top of your upper receiver, which also has a very nice lockup forward and back. Now, again, you're not really too concerned with that on a magnifier, but it is a nice thing to see. Now, the Holosun HM3x uses a buttonless mount design. The one thing that we are going to knock this for is that the mount design is a little weak in its detent system. Now, when the magnifier is pushed off of center, there is actually a little bit of wobble in between the magnifier and the mount. You can definitely notice it in slow-mo footage, but when the magnifier is in line, the mount is a lot more solid and there really isn't any of that obnoxious wobble. Now, I get this question asked all the time, but it is of course reversible. You simply have two set screws on the bottom of the magnifier itself, and then you would just simply unscrew those, flip the magnifier to get it to flip to the right or to the left, depending on how you wanted to run it. Now, there's also a riser that comes with the HM3x. So I believe the standard height mount is a 1.435, which is like a standard absolute co-witness. And then it has a 0.2 inch riser plate, which will of course take that to a 1.635 or a lower 1/3 co-witness. So basically, it will adjust to most red dots on the market, or at least get very close depending on your red dot that you're using. I've used this with a bunch of different red dots without issue, though if you're using a very tall mount, you probably won't be able to get it to line up perfectly unless you find some sort of aftermarket solution. Now, the problem with this mount design is that unfortunately it is not compatible from what I have seen and read with other mounts on the market. While it does use a 2-bolt mounting system on the bottom, they're much closer on like the Trigicon and even the primary arms and the Vortex styled magnifiers. So it's not compatible unless you were able to configure some sort of adapter plate in between them. So as of right now, I believe that the mount that it comes with is what you're stuck with. So if the mount is too big of a downside for you because it's not quite as strong, not quite as secure as other mounts on the market, then this is going to be a big downside of the optic. Now, the mount itself uses this little QD lever here to actually lock down to your upper receiver or to your rail, whatever you're putting it on, and it actually gets locked in place. So you have a little detent at the back you have to push down, and then you can actually unlock it, so it's never going to come off on its own, which with a QD lever, you definitely want something locking that in place. Otherwise, over time, with certain recoils, they can just come off on their own, and I have had that happen on worse, cheaper QD levers. Now, to tighten it down, you simply tighten down the actual bolt itself on the other side, which is a very substantially sized cross bolt. So as far as how it mounts to the rail is very good. The mount itself, as I mentioned, when it's in that off position, there's a little bit of wobble in there. So in slow-mo, you can see it moving back and forth. When it's in the on position or in line with your red dot, There's no wobble at all. It's not the most secure, most snappy mount like on the Vortex or even the primary arms. That has a very, very definitive snap into position, but it is decent in the inline position. It's just part of probably the worst part of the optic overall, and something that for some people is going to be a little bit obnoxious, that it kind of moves when it's off. Now, as you can tell, this is a longer bodied magnifier. This is definitely not a micro magnifier. Holosun actually did recently come out with a micro version of this that has basically the exact same specs. I believe it's an ounce lighter and about an inch shorter, but overall it has the exact same field of view and eye relief, which we'll get into a little bit later on. Now, weight on the Holosun HM3x is at 11 ounces, which is a little heavy for a magnifier. Honestly, I did not think it was that heavy, but when I looked at the spec sheet, it claims it's like 11.5 ounces, which is fairly heavy. So if you're using this with like a standard micro T1, T2 style of optic, it's going to be somewhere in the range of like 15 to like 17, 18 ounces, depending on the mounts that you're using. So overall, it's definitely not a small or lightweight magnifier, but it does do some things very well, especially for its money. Now, the first thing that it does fairly well is it has a fairly forgiving eye relief. The eye relief is quoted at 2.75 inches, which you think is very short, but because it has a longer optic body, you don't need to set it all the way back on your rail. So if you're using backup iron sights, you can push this forward a little bit and still have backup iron sights on your AR-15 if you want it. Now, the shorter version of this, like I mentioned, the Holosun HM3x Micro or whatever they're calling it, has the exact same eye relief, but the body is an inch shorter, which in effect gives you a shorter mechanical eye relief. So this has a longer body and a decent-ish eye relief for a 3x magnifier, meaning that it actually is fairly forgiving on long guns. If you're using a longer stock, even a rifle length stock, you can still make the magnifier work without having to crane your head too far forward. Now, another thing that I like about the HM3x is that it has a very decent field of view. The field of view is 37 feet at 100 yards, which if you extrapolate that to its 1x performance like we would on an LPVO, that's around 111 feet, which is actually very good. That is definitely in the very good category for field of view. That means that when you actually need to use it, you get more of that magnified image, which is something that I personally like. Now, that combined with the 2.5 inches of, or 2.75 inches of eye relief, plus a fairly tight eye box, not the worst eye box out there, but it is fairly tight, means that you get an optic that's fairly forgiving in terms of its eye relief and also gives you a very good field of view when you're looking through the optic. Now, because the glass architecture in here is fairly simple, even though yes, this is an overseas made optic that costs around $200, the glass quality is actually very good. You would get a very natural looking image, a very flat image. There is some distortion at the edges. You get a little bit of this like color shift, like browning towards the edges. But overall, the clarity, the light transmission is fairly decent for this price category. So again, you combine that with a decent eye relief and a pretty good, very good field of view, and you get a magnifier that's very easy to use. Now, again, for the money, this is one of the best magnifiers on the market. It's going to compete directly with the Vortex 3X magnifiers. I believe I actually picked up their Vortex 3X Micro for the same price that I picked up this one for about $199. Now, the Vortex has the same eye relief, the same field of view, but again, it has a much shorter body. It does have a better mounting system, but a much shorter body, meaning that it's a little bit less usable on longer guns because you are going to need to either set it way further back on your rail or crane your head much further forward, which of course can be a little bit uncomfortable. So overall, the magnifier does a really good job at what it's supposed to. It's supposed to give you a decent magnified image, has a decent eye relief, a very good field of view. So when you're actually using it, it is very nice. It's very easy. It's non-distracting. Depending on what optic you're using it with will determine how good the glass is. Some red dots have very poor glass, but here on the SIG Romeo 8T, the glass is fairly different. There is a little bit of a blue tint to it for sure, and that is magnified when you're using a magnifier. So if you're using a magnifier and you have like really bad blue tint, it's going to be even harder to use it versus if you had even nicer glass in the back and then even nicer glass up front. Like if I put on my EOTech on here, it would look even better, of course. But again, the magnifier does do a good job at what it's supposed to do of course, giving you that extra magnification, that little bit of extra precision, if you will, that extra positive ID, depending if you're trying to tell what you're shooting at. It is very important for most guns to have some ability to provide extra magnifications. Not every gun in every situation, but for most people, a magnifier is going to be a good option on their gun. And if you're on a very tight budget, you really only got a couple options. You got the primary arms 3X, which also has basically the same specs. The primary arms 3X magnifier is actually a little bit bigger. Now, when we get into the micros, of course, the micros are much smaller and going to have that shorter eye relief. So really, it comes down to what you need to use the magnifier for. Are you using it on a long gun? Are you using it on a PDW or something very small with a very short stock? That the eye relief isn't really all that important. These are going to be things that you're going to need to consider. For me, the main downsides of the Holosun HM3x are the fact that the mount is a little bit suboptimal. It definitely has some wobble in the off position, not in the on position, but in the off position, it does have some wobble. And the mount itself is not as firm. It's not as confidence inducing as other mounts on the market. And it, of course, is almost 12 ounces, which when you combine it with a 13.7 ounce red dot, means you have a setup heavier than most 1-8s or 1-6 LPVOs with a mount. So if you're on a budget and you can take a little bit of extra weight and size and you can live with the mediocre mount, then I think, again, this is going to be a very good option, but it's going to depend on what you need it for. So there are a lot of good options in this price category. And again, it's really going to come down to what you need, what gun is it actually going on. Now, the advantage of having a very nice QD lever on the Holosun HM3x is that you can put it on just about every gun on the market. I've used this for quite a long time. You've seen me run it on probably a dozen different guns if you've watched my personal channel at all. And it is just a very good magnifier for what it does. It has decent glass, decent eye relief, very good field of view. So at its main job of magnification, it does a pretty good job at that. It does have some tertiary drawbacks. It's a little bit heavier. The mount is a little bit subpar for the genre, but overall, it's still a very decent magnifier. So with all of that out of the way, guys, I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think of the Holosun HM3x. At this point on this channel, I've reviewed most of the budget 3X magnifiers, but if there's something that I've missed, go ahead and comment that down below. With all that out of the way, guys, once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out.